I'd like to just kick it off by introducing Benjamin Glenn, a colleague and friend actually located up in Silicon Valley, beaming down to us here in Los Angeles today through the smoke and the haze. And Ben, glad to have you. Ben is a Naval Academy graduate, worked for many years as an IP attorney at several prominent firms in the Bay Area, and is since now the founder and proprietor of Shea Glenn, which is an early stage med tech firm, kind of jack of all trades now at this point. I don't want to put any dates on anything, but since founding Shea Glenn.
This used to come in brown. This used to come in brown, so.
Ben is really recognized as an innovation expert. He lectures at Stanford Biodesign throughout the year, and we're very fortunate to have Ben joining us here at UCLA to kick things off. And I just want to note, this is the first in a three-part series that Ben's going to be joining us for. I'm really about diagnosing innovation, and through this series, we're hoping you'll go at some kind of talks to get at sort of that mindset piece we talked about at the beginning of the day on how to really approach things differently, and as we've heard throughout the afternoon. So thank you, Ben. I'm going to turn it over to you, and it looks like you're in presenter mode already, so you're ready to go.
Yay, very good. Well, I tell you what, I'm very happy to be speaking with you. Jennifer and I are trying something a little bit different this year. Last year with the fellows, I was more like the entertainment on a Saturday morning, like the cartoons. They all showed up, they had their little pajamas on with the little footies, and they had their morning snack, and it was like watching cartoons. We got to be together for about 4 hours on a Saturday morning. However, with the pandemic and COVID, I think that might be a little bit much as entertaining as I think that could be. So we broke things up, and I think with that, it gave me an opportunity to restructure and really kind of take a second look at the material that I delivered last year, and also to think a little more about, your program is growing. There's a lot more of you this year, which is, I'm really looking forward to getting to know each of you. I've seen the little bios. I'm already humbled and afraid. I hope we don't have time for Q&A because there's so many smart people in the room. I'll have to fill and then say, oh my gosh, I've got to run, or have my phone ring or something so I can get out of it. But you look like a fantastic group. I'm looking forward to getting to know you over the year, and certainly during these next 3 sessions that we have. So what I think we could really start with is just the title, like a matter of diagnosing innovation. A website that I started several years back is called A Matter of Innovation. And the reason I did that was that I began to realize that as I saw more and more entrepreneurs, innovation seemed to have less and less meaning. And what we saw were innovators in a particular industry, particularly our regulated industries, parroting what was going on in industries that had very little to do with the challenges that are really staring you right in the face when you enter into innovation within a regulated industry. So I thought it was really important to start taking a look at that, and how do we do that? So the things we'll be looking at today is diagnosing innovation, and we're looking at it through 3 lenses, 3 different ways of framing this up. So the frame, and then observing, and then questioning. So frame, observe, question. A little 3-part idea to share with you today. So why are we doing these sessions? So this is you're going to be looking at aspects of the common good, which is what all of our regulated industries deal with. And so what these are. It's healthcare, energy, finance, agriculture. We're going to be really focused on healthcare. That's the majority of the work that I do with Stanford Biodesign, but I've worked with innovators in all these different areas, and that's really what brought me to sort of these insights that I'm sharing with you today. And let's think about this. The US healthcare system clocks in at $3.6 trillion. I always joke and say it's a $4 trillion problem, and then somebody will raise their hand and say, no, Ben, it's 3.6. And I said, I know, but at the rate that we're solving it, it's going to be a $4 trillion problem. So these regulations exist, and I think they're part of what you can do to have better competitive advantage. But that all starts by changing the way that you look at and interact with these very, very large industries. So let's look at this first off. So we mentioned this in the beginning: frame, observe, and question. So first, to frame. Framing is what helps you shift your focus. Like what you see, any kind of visual storytelling in movies or in animation, the storyteller tells you what you need to know, but only enough to propel the story. Imagine that. That's the 30-second pitch with a VC. You only say enough to get to that next moment. You want to hook them long enough to get to the next thing. But the storyteller also establishes the story first so you can connect and have context for everything else that follows. So let's look at our first frame. Our first frame is big, big. It looks like this. It's the panorama. So the panorama, this is the one that allows you to see the entire sweep of what you're looking at. I use the movie camera because this is the image that in the visual arts, it's really what allows you to remain grounded. And then you can go deeper into the heart of the regulated industry that you're looking at. So we're going to look at movies. When we think about panorama, we want to think about movies. So you think about the frame. Every time you've seen a film, there are things that you can see and there's things you cannot see. The things that you can't see are outside the frame. Filmmakers do that all the time. You've probably seen this. I'll never forget watching a making of for one of the Star Wars whenever the DB8 showed up. And it showed the green screen. It showed the person that's actually running behind the robot. All the things that get cut out in the magic of films. But if you see the broad shot, if you see everything that's going on in the studio, it looks like madness. There's rigging, there's booms, there's lights, there's people running around everywhere, there's cords and cables. But then when you see the film, it's all nicely framed and all you see is the part of the story that moves it. So frames have edges. When we think about the panorama, it's got edges. There's a top edge, there's a bottom edge, there's a left, and there's a right. What you want to see, you're going to keep it inside of those, but we're going to find as we go along, the edges are where a lot of excitement happens. So here's the other thing to think about this. The beginning of a movie has what is called an establishing shot. So this is something I want to share with you. It's one of my favorite films. I'll see if this will work as we're sharing here today.
Pick the player. Almost more brilliantly meta than day for night, the player's meticulously choreographed crane shot comments on itself and its industry while simultaneously setting up the entirety of the plot, establishing all the key relationships, dynamics, and conflicts. And of course, in one of the most brilliant moments of self-reference, the studio security head complains about movies and their MTV cut style while waxing nostalgic about the long takes of old. What happened to films like Touch of Evil that set up the entire plot in a single long take?
All right, so there you go. That's that's a little bit of the establishing shot from Robert Altman's The Player. And one of the things that I love about that film, just setting aside that it's Robert Altman, who I think is just really very, very talented in the way that he presents stories visually. This shot was done with one camera in one take. I think it clocks in around 6.5 or 7 minutes. This is that wide frame, the panorama, and I encourage you to use that to get your first, as you first get your first footing as we begin to have a broader perspective on the healthcare system. That will be really important for us. All right, so now with the panorama, so here are the three things a panorama really gives us. It's very large. You'll find if you look at any of these films, they are intricately planned, which are, if you're going to be successful in bringing healthcare innovation, you will also be an intricate planner. And then you'll also realize that there are lots of people, there's lots of equipment, and there's many, many people that will help you. You are living inside of the UCLA healthcare system. You can see just how many people, how much equipment, and then how many other people there are around that are helping out in virtually every aspect of what's going on. So our first frame is the panorama. It's the biggest one, and it helps us see everything that we're going to be looking at. The next one is, because that might be a little overwhelming, we're going to take a look at the portrait. Now, the portrait is we're going to use a second sort of art medium. Here we're going to think about painting. Painting takes a little bit more time. It's a little more personal. You got to have a canvas, and you're probably going to need paint and different kinds of tools, and it takes time to get all those things together. So the portrait is what helps us start to see a way of stepping back from all the details of the entire industry, and instead it allows us to begin to look at maybe a segment. Maybe that first part where we think we're going to interact with the health system. So this all means that we're going to need to be able to pick out those paints that we're going to use. We're going to find a whole bunch of different kinds of tools and different ways that we're going to apply the paint, how we're going to manipulate that, what the brushes will do, learning which paints go together well, which ones don't. And every now and then you'll have to figure out how to scrape the canvas. But then again, you could also just get an afro and then just do landscapes, and it could be a lot of fun too. So remember, we always want to be able to, I always hope that you'll remember Bob Ross, because he was always super happy every time that he was that he was painting. And in fact, his entire show was called The Joy of Painting. So I think we can take a page out of the Bob Ross playbook and have joy whenever we're looking at those different scenes that we're going to be painting as we look at the innovations. So portraits, what are they? Canvas, so physical thing. We've got to have some medium that's going to hold what we do. We're going to need paint. Paints are going to bring color. Color brings life. The paints are probably going to be in layers. It's probably not going to be just one straight up thing. It's not going to be, black over here and white over there. It's going to be mixed, and that means layers, and that also leads us to structure. So how do you put this painting together? And of course, our portrait is going to include persons, places, things. Wherever your innovation impacts that industry, that's what the portrait is going to help you do. Now, that might still be a little bit too much. Maybe that's still too big a slice. You're like, Ben, I don't know nothing about no movies. I don't know nothing about no painting. Then I leave you with the Polaroid. Now the Polaroid is just about impossible to use wrong. You look in one end, you push the green button, and a photograph pops out. It was actually quite a hilarious thing. What's even funnier is that people now print out photographs that actually look like sort of the iconic Polaroid frame, which is the photograph was in the darker area, and then you had this entire strip on the bottom where you could write down, if you couldn't remember what it was or you wanted to remember what the date was, you could literally just write it on there. I like to think of the Polaroid as it's Sharpie ready. You can just write right on top of it whatever you want to do. I think you probably even mark up the picture as well. But the Polaroid represents those things that are really simple. It's easy to take a Polaroid, and it doesn't cost a lot, and it's kind of impossible to use the camera wrong. So those will be the times whenever you want to experiment. Those will be the things that you will use to do something really quick, or just to document what you've done. And as you can see in the sort of the illustrations I've got here, they're pretty easy. You can put them anywhere. You can hang them up, you can stick them up, you can put them on a wall, you could have them on a shelf, any way that you want to represent and sort of document the journey that you've been on. So our third frame, and our easiest one, is the Polaroid. Now this represents the handheld, easy to capture. It's really quick, and it just shows like, what if I tried something? And then it's also like magic, because the picture just sort of appears right in front of you. So why do we have these three different frames? Well, what I think it is these three frames will allow you to get a new perspective. So this new perspective, we've got panorama to lay everything out. And then we have portrait and Polaroid to help us draw in. Remember, we talked about edges. Edges are where things happen. So panorama, the big horizon, sort of end-to-end innovation for that industry. Then to take it one segment at a time, you'll use a series of portraits to analyze each one of those. And finally, rapid prototyping, inquisitive, maybe you go out and do a lot of informational interviews, and you use those to explore the edges. So Polaroids can give us those edges. Where does the main industry interact with this segment? Where does that segment interact with my company? What's inside the portrait? Could be your product, could be your company or your team. So that's what we're going to do with frames. We've got the big frame, which is the panorama. We've got segments, so we can compartmentalize that with portrait. And then we use Polaroids to look at those edges and take quick shots and use those to help guide what we're doing with our innovation. All right, so that's framing. The second thing we're going to look at, how do we observe? So to be really good innovators in such a big industry, and with those three frames, your skills of observation will need to go up a notch or two. So let's look at a way we can do this. And I think we're going to stick with paintings. And in this one, we're going to look at the fall of Icarus. Now, the fall of Icarus, story from Greek mythology. Icarus is the son of an inventor named Daedalus, and Icarus is the young boy who just cannot stand being kind of clamped down in that maze that is, living with his father. And so he becomes determined to make wings and to fly away. And so he makes these wings out of wax, and he starts to fly, and then the wax melts, as the story goes, and then he becomes the first in the data set for experiments in terminal velocity. So the story of Icarus is very, very old, but as you can see here, especially with Marc Chagall, that's Icarus, probably in one of the Russian villages that Chagall lived in. Picasso, not really sure when that could be, but certainly was not in the times of the Greek mythology. Same with Matisse. I'm not sure what happened there, very, very symbolic. And then we have, sort of like I guess he was marching in the parade on the way to the Wizard of Oz, and then that's the other one that we see. So not really the kind of the story of Icarus that I want to use. Instead, I really like us to use this one by Bruegel. This was painted in about the 1550s. And so we're going to use this to help us take our frames and to begin to observe what we see here. So now just take a few minutes. If you've never seen this painting before, just take a few minutes. This is The Fall of Icarus by Bruegel. We'll just take a few seconds and look at it and sort of take it in. I hope that you guys are able to see it and it's projecting all right and that it's large enough. So, all right, so now we're going to use this as an opportunity to look at 5 different frames inside of this painting. So the first frame that we're going to look at is the one that's just really prominent. So this is frame 1, the plowman. So here we go. So what do we know about the time that this painting is set in? This is not ancient Greece. So what time was this set in? Well, clearly they know about agriculture. They know about fields, they know about crops, animal husbandry. You know, the horse is wearing, he's got a bridle on there that's helping to pull the plow. The plow is made of wood, maybe there's some metal in there. Apparently, though, they haven't made many advancements in working clothes. Say, for example, coveralls or overalls. And, I don't know, a good set of functional footgear might have been useful. But it does give us an idea of, what they have. So this is the plowman. The second frame is the one right behind him. This is the shepherd. And here we can see that, yep, he's doing shepherdy things. He's there with his dog, and I think about this as probably the dog saw something in the sky, barked, and then the shepherd looked down at the dog, and then looked at where the dog was looking, and now he's staring at a blank sky. So the dog might have seen something, but I don't know that the shepherd did. But nothing really remarkable here. He seems like, he's found some functional footwear, and he's got his staff, but there's nothing else really remarkable about. He's a shepherd, and he's probably shepherding the way that people have done that for a very long time. Not much has changed in the 1550s. So then the next one is down here in the bottom right. This is a fisherman. And so again, the fisherman doesn't look like, he saw anything either. And it also looks like that's, if he's got anything, it's probably a pretty basic, line and a hook, maybe some tackle, but doesn't look like anything very large. Could even be recreational. He's just sitting on the bank there. But nothing really shows us that there was anything going on that was really remarkable there. And that leads us to the fourth frame. The fourth frame is probably the most technologically innovative part of this entire scene, and it's this tall ship. And if we look at this tall ship, you can see a lot of things about what was going on with these people. Remember, this was painted in the 1550s. Probably about 60 years before this was the first time that naval artillery actually showed up on a ship. So this is what I like to think of. This is probably like a 24 or 30 gun frigate. So the tall masts indicates that they had good working knowledge of textiles and how to make sails and sails that would stand up. This is clearly an ocean-going vessel. Highly skilled in woodworking. They understand naval architecture. Probably have celestial navigation. Ships like this could go over the horizon. So we can see here that the most technologically advanced example that we have in this telling of the story of Icarus is a tall ship. So far, no signs of anyone interested at all in aviation, except for the fifth frame. There's a bird sitting in this tree right above the fisherman's head. I like to think of this as, this is a hawk or a falcon. It's one of those, hunting birds, or just one of those really powerful birds. And I also think that this brings nature into the evaluation of this scene. So nature in our innovations, it's always there. There's always some part of, what the body is doing, what the interaction with a pharmacological agent or a surgical procedure, there's always some interaction with nature. And so I always think it's important to what would be nature's observation of this? So those are the 5 frames that we can use as we look at this image. So now that we've looked at those and we've seen we sort of looked at this through the lens of each one of those 5 frames, let's just ask a couple of questions. We're going to get into asking questions. Questions will be very important. So let's look at 2 of them here. So, what if? So, did they notice Icarus? And if they did notice Icarus, what did his innovation, and his innovation here, we're going to call it human-powered flight. What did his innovation mean to me? So let's look at each one of these again in turn. The plowman. Did he notice? Probably not. He's looking down. Probably didn't hear anything, he didn't see anything. So how would he use human-powered flight? Probably not interested at all. A little too far for him. If we played around with the idea a little bit, we might find some uses for some kind of a flying vehicle, but it wouldn't necessarily help him with his horse, his plow, his field. There's no direct connection. So the innovation seems too far away for the plowman. Shepherd's in the same boat. And, you know, as I set it up before, I like to think of it kind of comically. It's just the dog noticed. So again, nature, the dog saw this really unusual thing. Biggest bird I've ever seen, and he's barking that out in that sort of shocked dog barking language to his master, who hears his dog doing this crazy, I'm trying to get your attention, master bark. So the shepherd looks down at the dog and misses Icarus passing over the sky. The dog noticed that there was something really unusual. The shepherd is looking too late. So there will be some people that are, maybe they would have been interested in the innovation, but they weren't looking at the right time, or they just missed it whenever the innovation was passing by them. The fisherman, I think the fisherman interacts. The fisherman definitely saw this. I think that the fisherman is probably the one that's most impacted because the way I think about it, and Icarus splashes, you know, pretty much close to the shore, or at least the way I imagine the story, he splashes pretty close to the shore, so that little school of fish that the fisherman just found and was just pulling them out of the water, they all scattered because this man came crashing down into the water and scared all the fish away. And then he also realized that he probably swims about as good as he flies, so I better wrap it up so I can go fish this guy out of the water who's just splashed down in front of my favorite fishing hole. So I think the fisherman knew that Icarus was there. He may not have seen much of it, but he saw whenever Icarus's attempt at innovation failed. And then, you know, finally, looking at the tall ship, maybe the lookout, maybe some of them saw it. There could have been someone up in the mast, maybe somebody tending one of the yardarms. They might have seen it. A lookout may have called man overboard, except, you know, they would have realized that, you know, it's probably pretty far away and maybe it wasn't in their track. But I think perhaps they would have seen it. But again, what would those people think of someone flying? What purpose would that serve? How would that change the challenges that they're going to face as an ocean-going ship with, you know, it's a frigate, they've got gun firing systems, they've got navigation systems, maybe they have to figure out how to carry more fresh water, but how is human-powered flight going to help them? So while they may have seen the innovation, there probably wasn't anything to close the gap for them about how that innovation may actually apply to them. So Icarus, even his failed attempt, probably went unnoticed by the tall ship. Finally, our bird. Now, the bird is the one that I think, again, we're back to nature, and I think the bird noticed. The bird probably, you know, sees its kind. The bird observes someone in his element, which would be up in the sky, and noticed that probably not very graceful. I'm guessing that as the wax began to melt and the feathers or whatever Icarus was using, that structure that he was using to mimic plumage, as that began to fail and the aerodynamic characteristics of his powered flight, whatever form that took, began to become more and more chaotic, that the bird, who knows how to fly, saw this flailing, saw this, and reached this conclusion. Ah, yes, just another amateur. Who knows? Maybe this was the 5th or 6th test flight for Icarus, and the bird was just sort of laughing that he still hasn't got the hang of it yet, but he's trying. But I think the bird reaches this conclusion very quickly, and I think we'll find that too in nature. The body, particularly in healthcare innovations, the body will always tell you whether or not you're being an amateur. It will always tell you if something's going to work, if it's going to be rejected, or if that's actually going to help the patient in any way. So I think we can learn a lot when we bring nature into our observations. All right, so that's it for observations and what we've used here with the flight of Icarus. The last section we're going to look at, and we touched on it a little bit when we were talking about observations, is how do we ask questions? Because questions are the last part and probably one of the most important parts. How you frame a question, how you consider to use the perspective that you have when you begin to question, that can really open up the area that you're trying to innovate and the area that you're trying to explore, maybe the people you're trying to help or a problem you're trying to solve. So let's look deeper at questions. And this is the way that I think about that. And so a matter of diagnosing innovation. So when we're diagnosing, we're asking questions. We're going to look at those questions about important areas, and we'll do that with intentional feedback. So it turns into a little sentence. We're asking questions about important areas with intentional feedback. So if you can remember that phrase, that will help you look at these 3 steps that are the way that you can diagnose the innovation that you're looking at. So let's start in the beginning. So let's look at asking questions. We think about questions, I say we want to ask questions, so A-S-K. So ask, seek, and knock. So ask good questions. So what's a good question? Well, that reminds me of one of my favorite rabbi jokes. Why does a rabbi always answer a question with a question? Why shouldn't a rabbi answer a question with another question? I think that's really very insightful, because the questions will lead you yourself, asking the questions of your team, asking the questions of the group that you're trying to help, asking the questions of the particular area of technology you may be innovating in, asking questions, probing into that. That can help you really begin to understand a lot more about what's going on in that area. So a good question allows for good answers, and then good answers draw you and the other people or the system you're looking at into deeper conversation, which leads to having better questions and then getting better answers. All right, so the next one in our ask questions, S, seek different answers. So different answers, or even seeking to ask different questions, that'll drive you to getting different answers. So consider the different frames we talked about in the very beginning. Maybe you start with seeking questions that are much broader in scale. Maybe then looking at, if I were to segment this down, if I used a portrait frame, where would I place that portrait so I can look across those edges, asking questions on either side of the portrait or the panorama, or looking around the Polaroid. If you did a real quick snap, what would that look like? Where can you ask different kinds of questions and seek that out as you're beginning to look at and frame different questions as you look at a particular industry? And then finally, knock. So knocking on doors and ringing phones and contacting people in your network, at the edge of your network, people that you're introduced to by the people that are in your cohort now, or in other parts of the health system that you've never spoken to, and going out and knocking on those unexplored doors. That's going to lead you to understanding, in that panorama sense, to understanding more about other parts of the industry that maybe you haven't been aware of. Maybe there's a part of it that you had no idea, or you've had something in the back of your mind that you've always wondered about how that part of the healthcare system works. Where do these things go? What happens when? Whenever I walk in, I notice these 3 things. What are those questions? What are those other areas that you may want to explore? Those are the ways that you can ask questions, and that will pull you into more and different parts of the panorama of the industry that you're going to be exploring. The next one is to look at, we're going to build questions with powerful words. And one of the first times, and I really started to use this a lot more in my own work and working with entrepreneurs from, in all parts of the country, at all different stages, working in different industries, was to really use some powerful questions to begin to understand or, journey with them as they explored. And so one of the most powerful ones that I can think of is what if? Because what if engages your imagination right off the top. So real life examples are, what if? And when I was talking with Jennifer about this class, I'm like, what if? What if I used this, Fall of Icarus? What if I used a work of art? What if I used a work of art to explain some aspect of innovation? Because that immediately takes you away from the context that you might expect it to be in, and it also places it into a context that's neutral. Because everybody can look at that, and if we were together, we would be at the Hammer Museum, or we would be at some other place or outdoor with some sculpture, and looking at it together and exploring it together, but asking questions about it, all of which would help us to reinforce, the frameworks. Where's the panorama? How does this fit in? Where's the portrait? How could we do Polaroids to understand more about where this piece of art came from, or what it's supposed to be telling us, or what we can take away from it? So what if is a very powerful way Two great words that can start you down the road of looking at, a much larger view and shifting your perspective. But here's a real example. So what if? And so what if St. Thomas Aquinas wrote all 5 volumes of the Summa by asking and answering why and how? I read that a few years back, that the entirety of this work was a series. He just kept asking that question over and over. Why? You begin to answer that, then how? Or start with how, and then you answer that, and then you get to why. Just taking those two and playing with them. I did a class with a bunch of bioengineering students in New Orleans, and we looked at 8 competing products. It's called the product evaluation game. The product evaluation game is about using why and how. We evaluated all those products. We learned about everything that they had done, their business plan, technological development, how they were going to compete. All of that was used simply by starting with why and how, and then tensioning those 2 products. So why and how, very powerful. But this wasn't the first one that I thought about. The first one I ever used was when I encountered this little poem by Kipling. And so it's the 6 Honest Serving Men. This is just a piece of it. And I use it because it has those really punchy sort of, if we were in a journalism class, we'd be talking about these same sort of questioning words, but what and why and how and where and who. So, what and why, when, how, where, and who. So when you think about this, and this was, this is just a little snippet out of there, but actually what Kipling actually does is after this, he talks about how he uses these words, but he's a busy man and he's a businessman and all that. So they get to rest and they have tea and all that. But then he talks about, I always imagine, I've never gone to really look, but I always imagine his niece. But he talks about there's the young child, and this young child, she has a very different way of using them, and talks about asking questions from all day long. From the minute she gets up in the morning, she's asking these questions. And then it ends with this great line, which is, from the moment she opens her eyes, 1 million hows, 2 million wheres, and 7 million whys. I think if you could ask 7 million whys, you might make some great headway, no matter what industry it was that you were looking at. So I think if we use Aquinas and a little bit of Kipling, I think we might end up with a really interesting dinner party. So what if you had a dinner party for your idea, and you invited Aquinas and Kipling, or you had them in the kitchen at least to help you lay everything out so it would be a really good party? It would probably look something like this. Your big idea is out in the middle of the table. You put why and how at the head of the table, and then around it, who are the other dinner guests? Why, it's all the other questions. So who, what, where, when? And then in good, polite conversation, you just allow them to take turns, questioning your big idea, questioning the concept that your team may have come up with, questioning what you think the solution is, questioning what the question is that you're asking that you think is going on inside of the health system, or questioning the way that you're going to approach it, or if this is actually the solution that a payer may want. But just think about that dinner party and how much you would learn to sit and query what you're thinking about doing. So this is the Aquinas and Kipling dinner party for your next big idea. So then the next one is to take a look at, we're back at looking at diagnosing our big sentence. So asking questions, important areas with intentional feedback. This next one is the important areas. We'll come back to this. This is actually we're going to go deeper on this in our next 2 sessions. So we're not going to talk about it now, other than to say, this is a framework that I hope that you will adopt so that you can ask questions about important things with feedback, no matter where you are in your journey. And it could be about your own career. It could be about the work that you're doing within a team. It could be the work that you're doing. My hope is for the next year that we're together, as we'll be traveling more, or at least seeing each other through these virtual interactions, that we'll be exploring these important areas that may change as you progress through the year, and as you learn more, question more, and shift those frameworks that you have today about the industry that you're in, and begin to explore and look at more and different things. These areas might change, but we'll come back to this in our next 2 sessions. but that's the one that's right in the middle. So we're asking questions about important areas, and we do that with intentional feedback. So then let's dig in on intentional feedback. So this last step is that you want to have, it's some way that you're going to be exploring, and you want to always make sure that that remains positive. You always want that to be engaging, and you want to be learning from it. You want to keep using it. You want to keep propelling yourself forward by using that. And the simple way to remember this one, and I really ought to get like at least coffee cups or something, but the best feedback comes from the looping ranch. So what do I mean by the looping ranch? So you can imagine this is sitting out in, you're out in like Wyoming in the Badlands, you're in some beautiful outdoor area, the sun's going down, you're sitting there, you're having, a coffee or you're having a cold drink. At the end of the day, you got nowhere to go, you got nothing to do because you're sitting in the middle of Wyoming. And that's when you're going to sit back and take your time to reflect. So the looping ranch is where this reflection happens. And this is what it looks like. So this is the looping This is the brand for the people that ride at the looping ranch. And now, what do we do at the looping ranch? Well, first of all, you review where you are. You've got frames, you've made observations about what you're doing, and you review what's happened. You may do this alone, you may do this with your team. As you review what you've done, you may need to revise the frame that you've got, revise the questions that you've been asking, revise what you believed about your observations. So for example, one way we could revise, what if we went back in one of our later sessions and we looked at the fall of Icarus again? Since we've been through it once, you may change the way that you've looked at it. If you've never seen that painting before, you may not look at it the same way again. If you've never seen that painting before, you may now look at it in a way where you're picking out, oh, Ben, that's not it. It's not the shepherd and the plowman and the bird. It's, you may see something completely different. So you can go back even to things that you have seen or have observed. You may go back and revise the way that you want to observe that. And then finally, the last one and the most important one is you will renew your commitment to be innovators that are going to diagnose. You're going to ask questions. You're going to look at important areas, and you're going to visit the looping ranch. So you renew your commitment to be innovators that will diagnose the innovation that's before you, that you will learn about, and frame your observations, and then ask those questions that are going to help you, your team, and hopefully the industry that you're going to be serving to propel and move forward. So just remember, it all ends at the circle, the looping ranch. That's where you review, revise, and renew your commitment to be that kind of an entrepreneur. So in our next meeting, and Jennifer, after this, I'm happy to open it up to questions or discussion, depending on what else you need to do. But for our next meeting, I want you to bring 3 areas that you want to explore. So remember, and when we look at diagnosing innovation, this is to ask questions about important areas and then look at them with, and have that, meaningful feedback, the looping ranch, have that feedback loop. So these are going to be the 3 areas that, so just think about this, reflect on what we talked about, or maybe other things you heard today, or even it could be the things you wanted to work on. You may have come in the door with something that you wanted to work on or had an expectation, but whatever that may be. So I want us to open in our next session with you sharing some of these, or if you have them beforehand and can send them to me. But we'll start with a few of these to get us rolling, and then we'll start to look at the 3 areas. So that was all the remarks I had, and I'm happy to take your questions for the balance of the time. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Ben. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was fantastic.
Well, thank you.
No worries. My name is Byron. I am one of the Discovery Fellows. That is my track. I have a formal education in the background in hard science, but I'm a product designer by trade. So that's what brings me here. I thought it was exceptionally elegant the way you kind of laid out 3 different framing alternatives. And from where you sit in industry, do you appreciate when you hear maybe an innovator to talk about more than one of those different frames on a singular idea, or does that sometimes get exhaustive? I'm curious to know if you have any experience of where somebody walked you through not only panoramic, but found their way to a Polaroid view of whatever it is they're working on and how they've come about to find that.
It's interesting, and I won't give too much prologue into the areas that we're going to be going into later in the week, but the very reason that I made this was because a lot of innovators were simply ignorant of all the downstream requirements. And remember, and I hope that I said it, I know that a lot of you are focused on healthcare, but I really do think that this is generally applicable to all of our all the large regulated industries. It's the same complaint that I would hear from investors that were trying to finance people that were in fintech, and so they want to go into the financial system. One of them even said, Ben, their ideas and their understanding of the financial system is so bad, we won't even let them into our sandbox. So you've got a controlled innovation space that they just don't understand. They think they can go out and I look at a lot of the things that have happened in high tech, and I think that that's sort of you whip it out over the weekend. It's a bunch of coders or it's a hackathon, and you've got an idea and it's going to be a product by Tuesday. That doesn't happen in the regulated industries. You're cutting metal and making parts, and a lot of the work that I've seen within Department of Energy or agriculture, all my work within healthcare really showed this, and I think it's been a big problem for a number of years now, is that inability to understand just how long the trail is and all the things that are down towards the end. Particularly, I know we'll look at this more when we start looking at business, the 6 steps of having your ideas to being at scale in a market. Where's the payer? How many people at FDA have you talked to? Can you spell CMS? Do you understand where money comes from whenever you perform a service inside of the healthcare system? And these are now fatal flaws. This is not, I think the days of, I'm a doc with a shiny object that I've been sort of dreaming about having the next time I go into the OR, that's more likely than not, that's not a fundable approach, because it doesn't address all the downstream issues that are part and parcel of value-based innovation. And if you can't think of how to articulate your idea to where a value committee at a hospital, or how a payer is going to see this, or to be able to understand from an economic perspective that gap between the cost of your new shiny object and what they've got, which actually has been working in many cases for many years, and that the hospital understands, that the suppliers understand, that the health staff understands, that the OR scrub nurse knows how to use and can do it blindfolded, and now you want to come upset that apple cart. I think entrepreneurs that can explain that panoramic view and then drop into portrait mode and then explain with a Polaroid shot why that workflow is not going to change, why you're going to be just tickled to death and wish that you had never seen that other product. But that's the kind of storytelling that will be powerful and will actually help you as you begin to confront this. Because I'm finding that these challenges will be confronted much, much sooner. The ability to get capital can be more intricate. And so your ability to show confidence, or at least show that you know how to ask questions and that you are expanding your network to understand all these, what I would call a downstream issue. Most of the people that I meet in these kinds of programs are on the front end, that's where I spend the vast majority of my time, is on the front end. But I've seen, as I worked with clients over a number of years, that's not a cool breeze. That's a propeller blade that you're closing in on, and if you don't deal with it and figure out what to do, it will cause a lot of harm to both yourself and your company, as you don't deal. You really have to deal with what the challenges are in every industry.
Fantastic. Thanks for the answer.
Hi Ben, it's Desert. How are you?
Hey Desert, how are you? It's very funny. We should almost have like a guessing game, with the mask. I probably should have worn a mask or like a bandana, so I look like oh, there you are. Yeah, that's Desert.
Well, I'm so glad you're here. You know, this is a great opportunity for me to tell our folks that as a community, this is a confidential space that extends to our speakers, and we checked to be sure we don't have to sign confidentiality agreements amongst each other, which we don't. So for now, nothing we talk about is a public disclosure. That said, I think it would be interesting for some of us to hear at least one of the accelerator stories, a quick story, and to have Ben be able to give you some feedback.
Ben, thank you so much. We really enjoyed your presentation last year and again this year. There's so many pearls to take away from your talk, so thank you for that. And so that's kind of where we're at, but it seems very overwhelming at times to figure out how to get this product to market, which we know will help millions of women over the long run.
That sounds like you've got a great start.
Thank you.
You know, I tell you, and for everyone, you know, I really think one of the interesting areas for, you know, medical device innovation or just innovation in generally is how can the use of a medical device, how can the structure, how can a component actually assist the pharmaceutical industry, which we've all seen has had a terrible time with you know, the challenges of, you know, they make wonderful drugs, pharmacological agents that are very, very helpful and do a lot of good, and we wouldn't have modern healthcare without a lot of them. But we also find that there are, you know, numerous kinds of abuse, which has led to much of the addiction that we've heard about in the news, which is just, you know, destroyed lives. But then, as you just listened, it's a very, you know, very, very beginning of this tale for, you know, their journey of innovation, the patient, and what's the world that the patient lives in, and how to bring that healing and to do that in a way that this patient is actually able to take advantage of it. So what they're describing is something that I think is extraordinarily interesting, which is the combination device. So you have this, you know, there's absolutely a pharmacological agent that will be useful. It's, you know, it's not a Mars mission to come up with, you know, the antibiotic that's going to help with the yeast infection, nor is there any shortage of, you know, estrogen that we could use that I'm sure would be, you know, from the response of the body, it will be just fine. The trick is, how can we deliver to this patient? How do we help this patient population? Because he's probably not alone. And maybe there's another category of women that as they age, they're coming into that, or as with awareness or information comes out, other women may self-identify. This sort of trend happens in a lot of different areas of innovation. So I think what they're touching on is one of those that really, I always think of sort of like these key points, you know, and that's why I talked about the bird and the dog, nature, the human anatomy, will tell you what it needs, and the problem that patient is having, that will tell you what they need. And they've touched on that. They understand that. They see what they need. They also know the things that have been tried that have not worked, or at least have not worked for this patient, and maybe generally for arthritic patients, maybe aged women. It could be there could be sort of a larger category there that they could draw from or experiment with and again, this is asking those questions. I didn't mean experiment in the way of like testing it with them, but exploring it with them. You know, if we had this, you know, what if we had a device that could deliver this, and you once every 3 months, only in a short inpatient visit. There's a lot of different ways to frame that to see whether or not that would actually get the response that you need. But I definitely think this is an area that I'm personally very interested in. You know, there's a lot of different ways that you can play with that, and I think many of those have been developed within the medical device field, but are largely unknown to the pharmaceutical industry, or to big swaths of the pharmaceutical industry, or maybe just to this particular field of, you know, of women's health. So I think that it's an area that's extremely interesting. I really thank you for sharing that example because it's one that I keep going back to. And with a number of my clients, I always try to kind of bait them. Like, what if, the pharmaceutical industry was going to get really excited about your idea? What would your idea need to look like to get pharma involved? Because that changes a lot of the landscape about what you can do or what your device, the kind of reach that your device can have.
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm glad that we get to see you again, and you can think about that some, because that's a great question of is the angle of the pitch. Certainly the need is there. So we are at a time for our very first day. We are moving to a rooftop helicopter photo with masks. But Ben, we so appreciate your time and can't wait to see you again. Jennifer, thank you for connecting
All right.
him. So we're going to sign off with you. We're going to sign off with everyone that's on to Zoom. And Amanda, thank you so much for helping us organize this. And let me just make sure all these questions.
All right, thanks very much, Desert. We'll see everybody on Wednesday. We've got another session, 4 o'clock on Wednesday. We'll see you then. 3 areas.
Okay.
Bring your 3 areas. Smile big for the helicopter so they can see you through the smoke.
That's right. Okay.
All right, bye, everybody.
Bye.